In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and worship him." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and worshiped him. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now, after they had left, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, the angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. This is a story for the real world. It reads like an item straight out of the evening news. It is a succession, if you will, of on-the-scene reports from Jerusalem, Persia, Egypt, and Nazareth in Galilee. And the characters and events of this story are familiar to the global village of the 21st century, just as they were familiar to the Roman Empire, that global village of the first century. Take, for example, Jesus, the main character. There is no question for Matthew about Jesus' ultimate identity. Already in chapter 1, Matthew has introduced Jesus to us as the Christ, or Messiah, of Jewish expectations. He has also introduced Jesus to us as God's Son. Jesus is conceived by the Holy Spirit. Jesus' name is Emmanuel, which means God is with us. This Jesus, who has been born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, is clearly no ordinary child. Nor do the other characters overlook this crucial detail. The Magi come to Jerusalem seeking the one who has been born, King.
Oh, I'm seeing an interruption in service. Are other folks experiencing that too? Okay, we'll wait for Dorothy Jean to rejoin us. I will again make my pitch that if you are joining us on the live stream, you're very welcome to come meet us in the Zoom room and take part in the conversation that's going to follow. And the link is in the session description. Dorothy Jean, I think we have you back now. We lost you there. And you can unmute yourself as well. We can't hear you. I know what it's like with lots of different tabs up. Dorothy Jean, we hope that you can unmute yourself and rejoin us shortly.
Stream.
Okay, we can hear you now.
The Magi come to Jerusalem seeking the one who has been born King of the Jews. Herod anxiously asks the Jewish leaders about the birth of the Christ, and the Jewish leaders respond with a scriptural reference from Micah 5:2 about the ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Everyone seems to recognize Jesus' ultimate identity. Here is the Messiah for whom the Jews are waiting. Here is the King of the Jews, whose star the Magi have seen in the east. Here is God's Son, the one whom God has called out of Egypt. And here is Emmanuel, God who is with us. But if Jesus is all of these things, we are looking at a very strange story. What stands out most clearly and most often in this story is not Jesus' messianic authority. It is not his kingly power. It is not Jesus' unique relationship to God as God's Son. What stands out here is how vulnerable and almost anonymous Jesus is as the child. Matthew refers to Jesus as the child 9 different times in this story. And Jesus, the child, is clearly helpless and profoundly vulnerable. He cannot say anything for himself. He cannot do anything for himself. And he can by no means defend himself against King Herod and his brutal soldiers. Like all young children everywhere, Jesus, the child, is at the mercy of the others. Some of them want to kill him. Herod plots against the life of the child and seeks to destroy him. Some of them want to worship him or to save him from harm. The Magi worship the child and offer him royal gifts. Joseph takes the child and his mother to Egypt to save Jesus' life. Then he brings them back to Nazareth in Galilee, once again to save Jesus' life. Jesus is not in charge in this story. Jesus is a child so helpless and so vulnerable that his very life is at risk as a small child. So Jesus must be protected through unusual means and by heroic measures. Jesus reminds us of all the helpless young children in Bethlehem and of all the helpless young children in the entire world. And Jesus is the hero of our story. Now look at the villain of the story. Herod is a very familiar villain, both in the first century and in the 21st century. To begin with, Herod is a politician who shows us both the very best and the very worst of politics. Herod is smart. When he hears about the one who has been born King of the Jews, he recognizes the threat to his own political power. Herod is decisive. When he becomes aware of a threat to his kingship, he finds out all he can about his rival, and he hatches an immediate plot to destroy the other king. Herod has great political power. People comes when he calls them. People come when he calls them. People go when he sends them. Herod has lots of people at his disposal. He can send out military troops to carry out his wishes. Herod has learned the politician's art of doublespeak. He doesn't have trouble persuading the Magi to assist him in his plans to worship the young child. Above all, however, Herod is evil in his thinking. He is ruthless in his tactics, and Herod is totally cynical. It does not matter to Herod whom he deceives. It does not matter to Herod how many people he must destroy. All that matters to Herod is that he carries out his own selfish goals. If foreign statesmen show up on his doorstep, he will manipulate them. If rivals show up, he will do everything he can to destroy them. If innocent children get in the way, he will carry out a massacre. In short, Herod will do anything and everything necessary to get rid of political threats. This is the villain of our story, and this is a villain that we have seen many times over in our own world of violence. Now let's look at the other characters in our story. One of these is Joseph. Joseph is someone that we have seen many times before. Joseph is someone that we have seen all over our world. Joseph is a little person. He is an everyday, ordinary man. He is a powerless peasant. Just like the child in our story, Joseph is completely at the mercy of powers far beyond him. Because of immediate danger, Joseph and his family must become political refugees. They must flee their homeland for asylum in a foreign country. But Joseph also hears a voice that comes to him from a realm totally beyond the physical. And Joseph saves the life of the child by listening to the angel of the Lord. Joseph has no power of his own to alter the circumstances of his world. All Joseph has is a wife, a child, a dream from another world, and an enormous fear of powerful kings. All he can do is respond to powers which lie altogether beyond his reach. Joseph, the powerless political refugee, is surely a person of our own world. And then there are the Magi. These men are highly respected stargazers from Persia. They are the scientists of their world. In their own world, they are the wise and the educated. And these are the folks who see a star and recognize its crucial significance. And these Magi take great efforts to follow this star to an unknown destination and into a world of untold dangers. The journey of the Magi is no fairy tale journey. This is a journey right into the dangerous world of Herod and his soldiers. This is a pilgrimage of faith into a world of political power struggles. The Magi encounter backroom scheming, desperate paranoia, deadly plots, cynical deceptions, and the needless suffering of helpless and innocent children. Yes, the Magi finally arrive at their destination. Yes, they finally bring their royal gifts and present them to the child. Yes, they finally offer their worship to the one born King of the Jews. This is an act of high worship. But the journey of the Magi and their worship is also highly political action. What the Magi have done is nothing less than high treason vis-a-vis the earthly powers that be. To recognize God's presence in the world, to proclaim God's new act of salvation, and to respond in deeds of worship and allegiance will always be a direct challenge to earthly powers of all types, everyone who seeks to usurp the role and the power of God. Before these Magi can return home, their eyes are opened by the angel of the Lord to the evil schemes all around them. They discover that Herod has very nearly used them for his evil purposes. So the Magi return home by another road, and they avoid Herod, his plans, and his anger. These are the characters of our story. They are very real people in a very real first century world. Things do not look good at first glance. How could the outcomes possibly be good? when brutal rulers attack powerless peasants and innocent outsiders? What chances do Joseph and the Magi have against the massive power and the evil intentions of Herod the king? Surely this story will be total success for Herod, total disaster for Joseph and his family, and major humiliation for the Magi. But look again. Now we see Matthew's irony. There is yet one more actor in this story, the angel of the Lord. And suddenly the outcome is no longer certain. Every time Herod tries to do evil things to the child, the angel of the Lord gets in the way and tells people where to go and what to do. Herod has one goal in this story: to kill the one born king of the Jews. But Herod never achieves his goal. The angel of the Lord ensures that this doesn't happen. But what is even more ironic here is this: Herod has no idea who he is fighting against. He thinks he is fighting against a defenseless child. He thinks he can manipulate innocent outsiders who show up in his court. He thinks. What he doesn't know, however, is that he is fighting the strongest of all opponents, the angel of the Lord. This is a contest that he can never win and that he will never win. This is not a battle of equals. This is God's power versus Herod's power. And in this battle, Herod has not a chance in the world. One crucial note: Herod does have enormous power, to be sure, and he does indeed use this power for vicious and unspeakable ends. There are many murdered children, and there are many grieving mothers because of Herod's power and rage. This is a story of the real world. This is not a fairy tale. But there is one final irony here in this story. It lies in verses 15, 19, and 20. Not only is Herod unable to destroy the child, he is also unable to save his own life. And in the end, it is Herod who lies dead, and Jesus, the helpless and vulnerable refugee child, is alive and well in Nazareth of Galilee. So much for Herod's success, and so much for our human ideas about who has power and what power looks like and how events will turn out in the real world. So what can we learn from this first century story? And what does this mean for us in our 21st century world? Where in this story can we discern good news? How can this story empower us and encourage us for faithful life as disciples of Jesus in the real world that we know? I will offer just a few observations, and then I will invite your own responses. Number one, when God comes to us in the person of Jesus Emmanuel, the God who is with us, God comes into our world. God comes into the world we know every day and everywhere. This is the world of fear, pain, brutality, and anguish. This is not a make-believe fairy tale world in which everything is beautiful and peaceful. There would be no need for God with us in such a beautiful, peaceful world. Instead, God comes to us in the real world that we know. This is a world of political power struggles, of backroom scheming, of deadly plots, of cynical deceptions, and of the unwarranted suffering and death of innocents. And it is precisely this which makes good news out of the message that God is with us. God does not wait until our world has set itself right to come and live among us. Instead, God comes to us precisely in the midst of the trouble and the turbulence, the brutality and the bitterness, the aimlessness and the agony of our present world. And if that is so, then it is in the midst of our greatest distress that we must look for the presence of God in our world. Number 2, God chooses to work God's will through powerless people and by nonviolent means. The God who wills to save the life of Jesus, the helpless refugee child, wills to do so through Joseph. Think about it just a bit. God could have chosen many other spectacular and violent means to save the life of Jesus. For example, God could have sent a powerful plague on Herod to force him to change his mind and cancel his evil plan. Or God could have sent legions of angels to destroy Herod's soldiers in a spectacular battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. Or God could have rained down fire from heaven and destroyed both Herod and his soldiers in a blazing inferno. God's options for dealing with Herod and for saving the life of Jesus are obviously endless. But God doesn't work in this way. Instead, God chooses to work through Joseph. Joseph is an ordinary man. He has no power. He has great fear of evil rulers. And Joseph's only option in the face of danger is to take his family and to run for safety. Yet because of his faithfulness, Joseph foils the plans of Herod, the most powerful man in Joseph's world. And through his faithfulness, Joseph carries out the salvation purposes of God, God's plans to save a helpless refugee child. Number 3, it is always God who gets the last word and the last laugh over all the Herods of the earth, all the people who imagine that the world and its outcomes are in their hands. The psalmist has it right. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord has them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. In the long run, God's purposes will not and cannot be stopped. The journeys of Joseph and the Magi will never be easy or painless or without struggle. There will be plenty of pain and grief and loss along the way in their world and in ours. But we can know the final outcome with absolute assurance. That outcome will be God's outcome and God's will. And our confidence in God's outcome is the empowerment that we need for the challenging journey that we face day by day in our world. This, as I see it, is the God's eye view of power. I have a technical question for you, Peter, or anybody else who can answer it. I have a box on my screen that says view stream on custom live streaming service.
Right.
Is that the one to hit?
You can just hit
it says,
OK.
It also says copy streaming link, and I don't know I don't know what to hit.
I think you can just move that out of the way and not worry about it because it seems to be working fine. But this is my first time working with that, so I don't want to give you a definitive answer.
And I can't get to the view box, so I'm seeing things in small boxes, but that's okay. Thank you.
We appreciate you persevering with some slightly odd technical stuff. That was a super presentation. I really appreciated you going so deep into the story. I'm excited to get to our conversation.
That's where we're headed right now. I invite you, any of you who chooses to come in with questions or yes buts or comments or reflections. I would love to hear what your thoughts are about this story. I keep living with this story, and I have used this as a workshop many, many times because I find it to be such a powerful story, and I'm not sure that we always or often give it the credit that we should give it for being a downright amazing story, and one that should give us courage for living in our world. And if, as I imagine, many of you are in North America or in Europe, I'm not sure. Beatrice, I'm not sure where you are from, but it looks by names and other things that many of us are in North America. I can tell you that I myself need this story urgently right now. I live in the US, and I can tell you I need this as urgently as I ever have. So I invite you to jump in. I've done enough speaking, and I'd like to hear from you.
Dorothy, can you just repeat that last sentence or two that you have, that you wrote down?
On the paper?
Yeah.
Oh, the last paragraph?
Okay.
In the long run, God's purposes will not and cannot be stopped. The journeys of Joseph and the Magi will never be easy or painless or without struggle. There will be plenty of pain and grief and loss all along the way in their world and in ours. But we can know the final outcome with absolute assurance. That outcome will be God's outcome and God's will. And our confidence in God's outcome is the empowerment that we need for the challenging journey that we face day by day in our world. And this, as I see it, is the God's eye view of power.
So have you published that somewhere? Because that is beautiful.
Yes, I have. Well, actually, this specific, let me think. Something like this would be published. I should get hang on one second while I get the book from which I can, the book that I can send you to.
Well, let me go on with the question if I'm not speaking out of turn. There's just a few of us here, okay. Apparently.
Oh, and welcome, Peter.
Yes, it's not quite there yet. But so thinking of Christianity and Rome, right? Constantine takes over or makes Christianity the official religion of Rome in 400 in Rome, right? Constantine takes over or makes, I'm hearing myself twice, religion of Rome in There we go. And then Rome goes down, according to them, Rome goes downhill. But I would say that was a terrible move, right, for Constantine, because Constantine is the power. He's the
Right.
Caesar at the time. And so it was a terrible, terrible thing to happen to Christianity, because all of a sudden, military might is paired with Christianity.
Exactly.
And we have not shaken that since 400, right? That's 1,600 years of really bad history that we've had. And so I know while people would say, well, yeah, but he did spread Christianity throughout the world, but that would have happened anyway. And unfortunately, the military really mucked things up. I mean, as well as people like Dante, who like created imaginary hell, hells and levels of hell and all kinds of, and all the Italian, Italy is just, I mean, it's a beautiful country, but they created a lot of stuff that wasn't otherwise there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I can't speak about Italy, but what I can speak about, I mean, what I would say is that I do find it entirely coherent that you say that for Constantine to adopt the Christian religion as his religion and enforce it as a state religion was, I do believe that was a negative step, and that it screwed things up for time to come.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, how about now, thinking of today? I'm sorry, I'm going to be quiet. Let somebody else talk.
Okay. Who else has a comment or question or observation of your own that you'd like to raise? Yes, go ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I was listening on.
Could I break in just 1 minute to say that when you speak up, if you would maybe tell us where you're at, because we literally don't know where you are in the world, except for Josh Wallace, who is in Saskatchewan. But the rest of you, we don't know. So Peter, where are you from?
My name is Peter Stuckey. I live in Bogota, Colombia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Here's the deal. I'm 100% with you in your presentation. I was listening on, I don't know, you sort of navigate here and there and finally sort of land where you want to be. So, but anyway, yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think what's hard is to figure out who are the good guys and who are the bad guys here in the world now. In retrospect, well, we say Herod was the bad guy, and that's fine. But I'm sure you've been thinking of people like Putin and the war in Ukraine and people in the Middle East, the countries there and so forth. And it's not so easy because, for example, not just I, but I think a very respected political analyst in the States has said, all this could have been avoided there in between Russia and Putin if Biden hadn't been a hawk against Russia in regard to Ukraine, and if Ukraine would have agreed to not join NATO And if some other people say, no, he has these grandiose dreams of empire, and maybe he does. But what I'm saying is that it seems like, for example, that war might have been avoided, but we get our news from the Western side. And so, of course, Russian is the bad group. And of course, it's all power plays, and Western Europe fell into that too, and they want to weaken Russia. Everybody wants to weaken Russia in the West and all this. And of course, Russia doesn't want to be weakened. So what I'm saying is that it doesn't seem very easy to be the judge of all these things, but I think we do have to exercise discernment on political events, and careful discernment as a church. I imagine most Mennonites, because we're in the Western countries, feel that Russia has been doing bad, and they have been. But Ukraine and the US and Western Europe didn't do so good either on this. So that leads me to say, that's why I believe in the church. Well, one reason, of course. I mean, my bets are with the church and not with these powers. And in that, well, I think you're right, that we just have to continue trying to be faithful to Jesus's way, to nonviolence, and to insist on dialogue. These other guys, they're interested in selling arms, and they're interested in a lot of money and all this kind of stuff. And we can't be hauled into that. We can't be sort of pushed into that by the media and all that. Well, I'm going to shut up now.
Well, I think that this story, the value for me of this story is that it teaches me, and I hope maybe it begins to teach all of us, that Matthew was writing for the church. He was writing to the church, and he was writing to people who, for the most part, were people just like Joseph. And to me, Joseph is an amazing character here, because he's just as ordinary as they come and as powerless. And the moral of the story is not that those with the arms and the weapons and the people and all of the political power, that they are the ones that come out on top. The story actually shows us that our calling is to be faithful to what God calls us to do. And no matter how small we think we are, small and powerless we think we are, it does something to reframe our understanding of power. And that, to me, is the importance of this story, because it gives us a different way to look at the world. And boy, do I need a different way to look at the world right now. I keep hanging on to this story as it were for dear life, because it feels to me like this is the message we all need to be empowered with and encouraged by. This story that says what's important is to listen to the voice of the angel of the Lord, or the voice of God, and to be faithful in our own little ordinary ways. And that's what Joseph did.
If I can add something.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes. Something that you shared in your presentation was I think your first point of conclusion was that God is incarnate in the world, in the places where there's pain and disorder and suffering and things like that. So when Peter was speaking about, this sort of two sides, the choice that the world offers us of, who you're going to vote for, who you're going to fight for, things like that. And I felt like your presentation brought us to think instead of seeking God in the victims of the world systems, and those who are surviving or resisting in those ways. So that was something that really spoke to me, and I felt it's another helpful counter to the sort of both sidesism that goes on today.
Well, this particular presentation was actually a sermon that I preached on one occasion, but it also was part of it was also an Advent meditation that I wrote way back in the year 2000 when I was living in Bethlehem. For the fall, I was teaching a Life of Jesus course for tour guiding students, Palestinian tour guiding students, Muslim and Christian, or I should say Christian and Muslim, in Bethlehem. And it was exactly right when the Second Intifada started. So I was there for the first couple of months of the Second Intifada, which was this nasty, god-awful war that was mostly inflicted most heavily on the Palestinian people by the Israeli military. And this idea, this statement about when God comes to us in the person of Jesus, Emmanuel, the God who is with us, God comes into our world. That was something that I actually wrote in that meditation. I did a reflection on the children, not on Jesus, the child, but on the children of Bethlehem that were slaughtered. And I wrote this little meditation. It felt like it was being pulled out of me. It felt like somehow it was being written through me. I had the pastor of the Lutheran Church had asked me to write an Advent meditation, and for their online newsletter. And my first internal response was, oh, I don't want a deadline. I don't want a job I have to do. I don't want a deadline. My second thought was, I know exactly what I need to write about. And I wrote about the children of Bethlehem, or I wrote about this story and compared it with what was happening in Bethlehem at that moment. And at that point, I literally was hanging on to that story for dear life while I was in the midst of a situation where brutal violence was happening against ordinary people. And I had to hang on to this idea that when God comes to be with us, God comes into our world, and it's the ugly, it's the beautiful and the ugly world that we know. So that is truly a word to hang on to, as far as I can tell. It is the gospel that God comes into our world and is present with us right in the midst of all the ugliness and brutality and horrific violence that we face or that we hear about.
Dorothy,
Yeah, Josh.
Dorothy Jean, I'm very thankful for your words here, because there certainly is a lot of suffering and violence around us, both in your context in the States, here in my context in Canada. I'm like was said earlier, I'm calling from Saskatchewan. And I think the word about Herod and the vulnerable child, Jesus, the hero who is helpless in this story and yet becomes the center of the story, is very important for us as we look at our political situations. As I hear your talk here, though, I have to wonder what this looks like, not for Christians over against the world, but how we handle power within the church. I don't think, well, two things. One, because of the history, probably going back to Constantine, and we could throw in all the forms of colonization and industrialization, and now, neoliberalism and all the fun stuff. The church has power running all over through it. We don't find ourselves all on one side of the state or business power or economic power or the other, but it runs right through the middle of us. So it's inside of the church. And while probably we can't claim too many Herods within the church, though some of the Herods might claim church membership to get themselves elected, or might view themselves as spreading some sort of religious empire here or there.
We have a good illustration for you, not so many years back here.
Which one?
We have a good illustration on our side of the border.
Yeah. I'm still a U.S. citizen, so I got a foot in that a little bit. I don't think, especially as I think of the little Mennonite congregations that I'm connected with here in Saskatchewan, I don't think I have a lot of sway, and they're not going to listen to me preach or teach and change their approach to power on the basis of what I say about Herod and the child. I do see that there is some of the characters in this story do line up with some of the diversity that we find within the church. I can think, as I was listening, the earlier workshops, or I guess in Indonesia, the later workshops last night, I was in the CPT, the community peacemaker teams, as they were talking about work in Colombia and Palestine and here in Northern Ontario and other places. And I can see many people who might, many congregations, many Christian folks and otherwise, who would see themselves in the character of Joseph, as you talk about it, as powerless, as pushed around. When I look at myself, I don't find myself in the role of Joseph. I don't have the power of a Herod, but maybe I fall more in line with those, I'd like to think maybe with the Magi.
Mhm.
Maybe I can use the various forms of privilege that I have and hold those lightly and open them to God, to at least not cause more damage and play into the politics of the Herods. But there's another character group that you didn't mention that shows up in this story, and it's the chief priests and the scribes, right?
Oh, yeah.
Who, like the Magi, are also educated elites who have all sorts of privilege. And sometimes I wonder, as I look in the church, how often am I being like the Magi? And as I look at privileged folks within my congregations, and how often am I or are we being like the temple aristocracy that Jesus often finds himself in conflict with?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I relate, knowing that at very best, I'm a sort of a side character in the story, that the very best thing I can do is worship and then get out of the way so that Joseph can follow the voice of the angel, and the angel of the Lord can do the thing to save Jesus. I'll have to see how this will work into my preaching over the next few weeks, or maybe when Advent comes around.
I was just going to ask, are you a pastor?
I pastor. I am temporarily the pastor to the pastors here in Saskatchewan, the conference pastor, interim role. And then I have a little house church that meets in my backyard. But I listen more there than I talk. Anyway, thank you, Dorothy Jean.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning. I was thinking from mentioning the chief priests, I should have made them a character. I mean, I should have brought them in. And the other people that I should have brought in are the mothers. I wrote this long before I had written. I'm right now somewhere in progress on a paper about women and empire in the Gospel of Matthew. And I realized as I was reading this paper that I left the mothers out of the line of characters. They are there as well as, and so both of those things are very helpful. So thank you for mentioning the chief priests and scribes of the people. If I dare, Claire, was there anything that you would like to ask or reflect? I don't want to leave you out of the discussion if you would like to join. Or be
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add, but I've just been reflecting on the Magi mostly, and you talked about the way that they recognize God's power and respond in worship, and that in itself is kind of an active rebellion against the power that is used for evil in the story. So yeah, I don't know. I've just been thinking about that and the steps in that you first have to recognize God's power at work, which can be in contrast to the power in the world, and then respond to it in worship. And I think we see that they their response is pretty active, and they're like going to worship and probably visible, and like other people wouldn't necessarily agree with that or respond the same way. So I've just been thinking about how that translates to our present lives.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. I just want to say about the language of worship. What I always said in the classroom whenever we had reason to talk about this was that the language of worship in the Greek New Testament, the verb for worship is proskuneo, and proskuneo is a verb that has a preposition on the front, pros, which means towards, and the kuneo is related somehow with our words that have to do with kinetics, I think maybe, or I could be mistaken, but it seems to me that it has to do with some kind of action. And I think it literally means, proskuneo literally means the stance that you observe or that you take in front of a ruler. You bow down in front of this ruler. And the secondary meaning is what we normally have it translated as in the New Testament, which is the word worship. And in fact, I retranslated the one word in the New Revised Standard that I used because it said to pay homage or something like that. And I wanted, the whole point of the story is to show that they are coming to worship, and that Herod says that he also wants to worship, and we know what kind of worship he wants to do. But to say that worship is a stance that you take in front of a more powerful person is to say that worship is indeed a deeply political act. It is saying that we give allegiance to God and not to the ruler of ultimate allegiance to God, and not to the ruler of the country or the state or whatever. And to me, that is to raise a tricky question here. It might not be tricky in this group, but to me, it's the obvious reason why we cannot have flags in our churches, because that's getting the allegiance in the wrong direction entirely. So yeah, thank you for your very thoughtful comment. Just one other reflection on that. I was just complaining bitterly to a friend recently. I'm singing in a choral performance. I will be later at the end of July, and we're rehearsing at a church, and I won't mention the name of the church or the denomination of the church, but it's not a Mennonite church. And I was just stunned a couple of weeks ago because when I drove onto the church property, there were signs for a Virginia legislator who's running for office. And I just about flipped. I thought, this is right on the premises of the church. It's not even just off the line or something like that. It's right on the premises of the church. And what is it doing? What are these signs doing here? But anyhow, thank you very much for your reflections. Beatrice, Peter, whichever Peter raised your hand. Peter,
go ahead, see if Beatrice wants to say something.
Beatrice, do you have any questions or comments? I don't know who you are or where you are or what language you first speak, but do you have any questions that you would be interested in asking or comments? And if not, that's fine too. Oh, okay. Am I even pronouncing your name right? I don't know whether I'm pronouncing your name right or not. I hope so. Forgive me if I haven't. Thank you for introducing yourself. Peter, let's go back to you since you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think.
Can we see you?
Oh, yeah. Let's see here.
There you go.
I think, well, for one thing, I think we really need each other at this time. I mean, brothers and sisters around in I don't know, in the Mennonite church or within one's own congregation, or to sort of keep our direction right, because the powers of seduction are very strong, and really what the kind of thing you said is just completely countercurrent. And so I think we need each other to keep us on course, for one thing. And I think I don't know what happened. I think Josh, was that his name? Josh from
To leave.
Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
I think his mentioning the religious leaders and the Pharisees are, or the I guess they weren't Pharisees, they were
Priests
priests and the
and the scribes.
doctors of law and so forth. I think that's a very rich vein to explore, because all these similarities and with sort of our countries and our rulers and their interests and churches lining up behind the Herods of our time, and it's just super relevant, and yet it's not a popular thing with other churches or and much less with secular society. So yeah, I think that's a rich vein to explore in the future presentation, to include, and of course the mothers are the victims, and the victims have to be held in first place, And yeah, so all that, I also can sympathize with you for the saying how over the years you keep coming back to this passage. Here in Colombia, we had a very long war, a very bloody war. And I kept coming back to God's dream in Micah 4 of a world without war, and that these are the words of God Almighty. And so that's what's going to happen.
Mhm.
But we have to keep hanging on to hope in our vision. So thanks a lot.
Well, you're welcome. Glenn, I see that you raised your hand. Since I never did figure out where you were from, I mentioned that only after you had spoken. Can you tell us where you're from?
I'm Long Beach, California.
Oh, okay.
So, and actually, if any, like, I don't know if anybody else is Mennonite, but we don't have a Mennonite church here. There's one like way up north in Pasadena, but we need one here. So if anybody, and we need a Mennonite church here. Anyway, so it's interesting. You say the villain is the one who responds to God. And I was thinking, I'm sorry, the hero is Joseph is the hero and he responds to God. Thank you. And I was thinking, well, say, for example, the people in Ukraine right now who are leaving the country, are they like the heroes? You know, I always think about the Monty Python sketch where the powerful come in and the warriors come in and the guys go, run away, you know, and they start to leave. I mean, is that the response, run away, or is it just following God's lead? Because turning this, obviously in our society, the hero, which I think a lot of these young guys who go around shooting people in parades and town squares and so on, they think there's this hero myth, you know, the guy with the gun who goes out with power and overcomes many people. And it's the wrong myth. And it's going to take a lot to overcome that. And most of all, like Americans, of course, who are contributing to the military support of the Ukraine are actually exacerbating that issue, right? By continuing the war. I haven't got it all figured out yet, but I'd like to hear what you're thinking about that.
Well, it's challenging in the extreme. This story tells us that we need to be listening to God's call to us. And that may be a different thing depending on, I mean, we have perhaps different callings, but nevertheless, we are called to respond to God, and we are called to respond in
So I guess my question is partly, does God call us to war sometimes, or is that misinformed, mishearing God's word?
Well, you know, the real test of that question would be if we had somebody from Ukraine on this. I mean, there's the potential that somebody from Ukraine could have been on this workshop this evening. I don't know how to speak for the Ukrainians. I don't even think I have a right to speak for the Ukrainians. but I would love to listen to what they have to say.
So how about as Americans, are we misinformed by sending weapons over there?
Well, now we're into things that I have no business talking about. Yeah. Are we misinformed? I struggle with this. I literally do struggle with this precisely on that question. But I know that God calls me to be faithful in ways that are not violent. Peter, you also had your hand up again. Would you like to come in?
I'd love to. So I can't remember who said it, but I think it was this question about running away. And as Dorothy Jean, as you were sharing and taking us through the account, I was keeping a note of the different types of power that I noticed that you were sharing about.
Good.
And one of them was the power to run away, which I heard a podcast a couple of years ago called something like The Revolutionary Act of Running Away, that talks about how in movements for political change and revolutions around the world, the ones who know when to run away are the ones that survive. And I think it's not my history, but many people in my congregation have stories of where they had to leave, they or their families have had to leave situations of repression or violence. So, you know, I think about that. That's a power that Joseph and Mary have. They're thankfully not rich people, right? They can just drop whatever they have and they can leave. They can get away. Then there's, it's not mentioned in the scripture, but we believe that there's a big Jewish community in Egypt that can receive them, and perhaps extended king networks, things like that. And I think part of what I heard in the presentation is recognizing that there are many types of power in the world, and that God calls us to certain types of those powers and away from others, away from the temptation of power to harm others or to control others. And so I think I've been converted in recent years to thinking about the power of running away rather than the power of standing and fighting, which is, you know, much more heroic and exciting and makes for better TV shows, right? But it's much less good at ensuring survival of your movement and your personal life.
Well, thank you so much for that. That is truly a helpful reflection. Before our time quite runs out, I do want to go and get a copy of the book that I would recommend to you if you want to read any more of this kind of reflection. I'll be gone just an instant here.
Yeah, that was really nice, Peter. I like that, the power to run away. And what are the other powers that you were thinking about? There's military, there's power to run away. Like, did you have others in mind?
What about the power of dreaming as a big one? I hadn't noticed before, but there are 3 dreams in the story. And I, you know, you could take that in all kinds of different directions, but there's something about an awareness, a spiritual awareness, that I thought was cool.
The book that I have that I can recommend to you very selfishly, but it is the one that has in it reflections like the ones that I offered you this evening, because I wrote it's not an individual, it's not a single monograph, it is a collection of essays, and it is entitled The Irony of Power. And the subtitle is The Politics of God Within Matthew's Narrative. not the politics of Jesus, but the politics of God within Matthew's narrative. It is published by, it's one of the imprints of Whitford stock. It's published by Pickwick Publications in 2017. So if any of you have interest in looking at more of those kinds of reflections that I play out through reading the Gospel of Matthew, that's where you can find them. The irony of power,
Yeah.
the politics of God within Matthew's narrative.
It's on Amazon for 31. So I'm gonna order it right now. Looks great.
Super.
But I think, can I just mention something? Because I think I'm in a context here, and I've got Mennonite friends, but I just don't talk to them all the time. So I got news, right, hitting me, and they all have one perspective. It's different than my perspective, but I'm constantly playing counter text to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to be more immersed in the world that you're talking about. And it's, I really want that. I don't have it. I want to hear the news from Dorothy Jean's perspective and from Peter's perspective and from Claire and Beatrice. I want to hear the news from that way, because I'm not advancing very much in my thinking about these issues. I mean, I'll get the book and read it over, but then I got no one to talk to about it. The Mennonite Central Committee had a book club, and that was really great. But they've dropped it since. I think we need more of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a worshiping community of any kind?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I go, our former Mennonite church was in Fresno. So Willow Avenue.
Oh, okay.
And then, so you got Willow Avenue, and then I go online to Woodland Hills in Minnesota,
Mhm.
where Greg Boyd is
Oh, okay.
Greg is really good, and
Okay.
then we have a local church here, but there it's not as good. Well, the Mennonite stuff is all good, but I'm still looking.
Well, I hope you find. I want to thank all of you for being here for this hour and a half. Sorry about my computer glitch. Maybe I'm going to have to go to the seminary. No, it wasn't the seminary. It wasn't my computer's problem, I think. It was something about Zoom, something about connecting up with that MWC program or something, I think, that got in the way of my Zoom. Something got in the way of my Zoom. But I want to thank you all for being here and for the very thoughtful things that you have offered by way of reflection. I'm just grateful for you and for the participation. I had no idea whether I'd have 5 people or 50 or exactly what would happen, but this has been a wonderful chance to discuss. And thank you all for your presence and your participation. And Claire, I think we never figured out where you're from.
So I'm currently streaming from Thailand, but I'm from Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Oh,
and living in Washington, D.C. these days. So
okay. So you're from Harrisonburg.
yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here and for your participation. I guess we need to call this a halt because it seems to be about 8:30. So blessings to you all, and
Well, thank you. I think before we hold, I just want to express our
Okay.
gratitude to you for leading us through this story and bringing this to our remembrance and to our challenging us to consider the place of power in our lives. I know that this whole story will continue to live with me as well as it has with you. So I look forward to that. So thank you so much for leading us through all this. It's been really great.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.